This is Blake Temez with the Blake Temez podcast, where I speak as a Catholic layman to Catholic laymen about missional living, wisdom cultivation, and legacy building in service of Christ and his bride, the Church. Thanks for being here. In the literature on spiritual development and on the history of the Church, I should say, there seems to be this tension between technique and grace, a tension between practical disciplines that someone takes on in order to develop their relationship with Jesus, with the triune God, and the fact that any such development is a gift freely given that can't be like conjured up simply by activity. So that's what I mean about the tension between like technique and grace. There's been a related controversy in terms of Pelagianism, and that being characterized by the viewpoint that mankind can do good all on our own, and that God's assistance is not really necessary, to make like a simplified version of that heresy. And I see that being as connected to this tension between technique and grace, because if spiritual development is made about simply like perfecting certain forms of prayer, different mental techniques, different ways of meditating, and things like that, then it can become confused. Like success in those behaviors can be confused with like God's salvific action in one's life. And so this has been coming up in my mind as a question, in part because of the work that I see being done by those who are addressing the so-called meaning crisis or meta crisis, and many of them being affiliated or practitioners of different forms of Buddhism. And I know very little about Buddhism. There's more that I could learn in order to speak in an informed way about it. But the impression that I've gotten from figures like John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall, and those that frequently have discussions with them, or they kind of have conversations in that circle, is this emphasis on like practices, like consistent practices, whether they're dialogical practices or embodiment practices, meditative, did I say dialogical? And that participation in those is what contributes to one's capacity for like addressing the meaning crisis personally, but then also corporately, right? If there's a lot of people participating in those practices. And so that makes sense in the like materialist worldview. And I say materialist not because the people in this area neglect the transcendent. There just seems to be this different emphasis that I'm still trying to wrestle with, to be quite honest. It's at odds with the Christian viewpoint, because there's a sense that humanity's greatest good can be achieved in this life, in this world. No second coming, no parousia required, right? And again, this is at odds with Christianity, but I also see like an oblique point of connection, because there is this sense, within Catholic theology, that the life of the world life of the world to come is to be participated in now, right? So that it's not just, do one's best so that one can get into heaven and then life begins then, but that there's a real participation in the resurrection of Christ now, for those who are baptized in particular and who participate in God's divine life in that way. And so there's that too. And I don't see what these practitioners are doing as completely irreconcilable with Christianity, because even in the Christian tradition, we have long-standing practices that relate to natural asceticism, right? Like depriving the senses or reorienting the senses so that one is better disposed to the quiet of prayer, for example, or for receptivity to the word as it's proclaimed in the liturgy, or as it's reflected on privately in Lectio Divina. And so, especially in the monastic tradition, we have these disciplines which in some way have technique associated with them, right? There's manuals about how to prepare oneself for Lectio Divina, and manuals for how to I guess, again, do things in the natural realm to kind of calm one's passions so that you can enter into a meditative state. And that's there. I just think that it's not as prevalent. And as Christian spirituality has tended to make increasing distinctions between so-called monastic practices and the spiritual disciplines of everyday, quote unquote, everyday believers, they seem like a world apart, that there's not this sense of discipline and technique and all of that kind of being counseled for lay people. It's just a matter of going to mass, and go to confession, kind of just showing up for these isolated events, right? As opposed to seeing those events in their full sacramental reality and being connected to a fuller life of spiritual disciplines that have a technique aspect to them, but that don't become confused for salvation itself, right? That there is always God's salvific work, and that fidelity to those disciplines and even mastery of certain techniques does not make one a saint, right? That it's not the same thing. And so there is a smattering of thoughts having to do with technique, with grace, with kind of holistic formation when it comes to relating the sacraments to other disciplines, and where there is connection in the Christian tradition with what's happening in these, call them Buddhist adjacent responses to the meaning crisis. So that's a set of thoughts right now, something that I'm working on. Definitely open to anyone else's thoughts there. So thank you, and God bless.